get by. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Thomas Maguer, and he is the CEO and co-founder of Republix. And Thomas, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. And we have a mutual friend, Jason Swank. He's been on the podcast twice. And the first time he talks about how he built up his agency to over 8 figures and sold it. And the next one he talked about was really about Republix and what you guys are doing, because I know he's involved and you guys collaborate on Republix. So everyone check those episodes out. And another good one is, you'll appreciate this one, Thomas. Todd Taskey I had on. He's got the Second Bite podcast. So what he does is he pairs private equity with agencies and helps sell agencies. And he finds sometimes they get more on the second bite than they do on the first, right? Because they sell the private equity and that private equity sells for a larger multiple because they built up more EBITDA. And that's actually what Thomas is doing and has done, which we'll go through that and many more on InspiredInsider.com. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships. And how do we do that? We actually help you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the accountability, the strategy, and the full execution around a podcast. Thomas, we call ourselves the magic elves that work in the background to make it look easy for the host and the company. So they just run their company, develop great relationships, and produce great content. So for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. And I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com or email support@rise25.com. And I'm excited to introduce Thomas Maguer. He's CEO and co-founder of Republix. They help clients in direct-to-consumer brands, dental clinics, B2B professional services, SaaS. And what they do is they help these companies generate revenue predictably. Who doesn't want to do that, right? They were the 14th fastest growing company in Canada with 9 agencies in their group and over 32 million in revenues. Most impressive thing, Thomas, is I'm not sure how you all do all this. You have 6 children, 5 boys and a girl. That's crazy, right? You look young too. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Let's talk about, let's just talk about Republix and what you do first, but I want to get into where this all started with eRational. But talk about Republix for a second and what you do, because I know you were saying before we hit record, you have 25 services.
Yes. And so Republix was built on a vision where the major problem is that growing a business is hard. And I know this as an entrepreneur, Jeremy, you know this, your listeners would know this as well. And one of the primary reasons for failure is a lack of growth. Now, so revenues solve a lot of these issues. And so we came into the market saying, we want to go ahead and solve the revenue problem. And one of the big things that we focus on is how to deliver predictable growth, which is revenue and leads, on a hassle-free basis. Because the other big issue is once you know what you need to do, which is a problem in itself, then you have to manage multiple agencies, vendors, and internal teams. Some work, some don't. And then you as the founder or the CEO or the executive are now mired in the details and not doing your job. So we said, we want to go ahead and handle that pain for our market. And we want to go ahead and make that growth experience easy, predictable, and hassle-free. And so that's been the mission for Republix.
Your journey started with your agency before you grew. Talk about the initial idea for the first agency.
So it happened by mistake. You know, I did a career in finance, and then went off on my own with a trading company. We're doing futures and options. It went really great right off the bat, and then nothing after I quit my job for a 1-year period. So we're on the edge of bankruptcy, and decided to go ahead and add value to my investor list. So built up a list. Turns out I knew how to do some advertising. Didn't know that that's what it was called back then, but I had a list of maybe 10, 15,000 investors, and just started asking them, what do you want to know? I'm here to help. And they started providing this different information, in terms of what they wanted to learn. Because I learned through, over 5,000 phone calls with these folks, that they wanted to generate money so that they could fund their projects or things of this sort. So based on that, I created educational content, myself and other partners who were experts within their field. And at the end of it, I said, hey, by the way, if you love this, you'll love this course that was structured all around what they wanted to know, that we would build with these partners and teach them on a 6-week intensive. And then we did $17,864 that day, saved us from bankruptcy, which was amazing, and never went under, thanks be to God, came close many times. But from there, people said, could you do that for us? That's how eRational Marketing was born. So it was born by mistake. It started with clients. And at which point my specialty was how to take somebody's knowledge, turn it into a curriculum, and sell it using a product launch methodology to go 0 to $1 million in sales as quickly as divinely possible. And the record for that was 2 weeks in 2015. But I was a one-man army at that point, and my mentor at the time said, listen, if you want to change the world, you have to lead people. You can't do this alone. You need a team. So started building a team in 2015. And then with eRational Marketing, started seeing that people were having a really hard time in terms of growing their company. And then we became obsessed with how to deliver the result predictably. And because most of them would sign up for services or take a course or whatever it is, and 99% of the time they would fail. And so we ended up bringing that success rate up in terms of getting a funnel up, getting some traffic going, doing all that stuff, with 67% of people getting results within 5 days, which is crazy. But that came this new methodology of how to make sure that we're delivering on the service like a process, and making sure that process is repeatable to produce the appropriate outputs, which is revenue, lead, sales. And so that was eRational Marketing. And what we realized there is they would then say we were specializing in B2B professional services. And then they're like, can you build us a website? We'd say yes, and then lose money. And then they're like, can you go ahead and do Facebook ads? We say no, but we have a partner that does. And then the partner would fail, or there'd be an issue in terms of handing off the client, and the customer relationship would fail. So if you can't build it and you can't partner for it, we said, let's buy it. And then that became the start of the Republix journey, to find the services that our customers were asking for and bringing those into the group so that they could have that seamless experience, and then further productize those services for scale.
So you have eRational, and it sounds like the first iteration was info products and teaching, and then people were asking you to do it for them, and then you started doing it for them, and that turned into an agency model. And then the next piece is you were getting requests for these services you weren't doing, and you would say yes and try and do it, but maybe the capabilities weren't there, and then you'd partner, but maybe that didn't work out, and then you started purchasing. So what was the first acquisition?
So the first acquisition was LinkedIn to Leads, because they were doing a lot of LinkedIn lead generation. And
Were people requesting that? Is that
correct.
okay?
Yes, because we're very, very strong in email. So then opening up that additional social channel would create a greater lift for our customer base, right? And then following that was Golden Rule Growth that did the done for you LinkedIn campaigns in a way that was compliant with LinkedIn. So then it was the next logical step, right? So that's kind of how the ball got rolling.
So usually the first acquisition someone's making, first of anything that we're doing, it's kind of clunky. Like the process isn't worked out. What did you learn from the first acquisition with LinkedIn to Leads that you then started to perfect more going forward?
I think the first acquisition was really around how to do things, how to think outside the box without the constraints of how private equity says it should be done, how MBAs think it should be done, how conventional wisdom thinks it should be done. Because oftentimes you don't have a large equity backer or the perfect environment to go ahead and do an acquisition. And so you need to think about it differently. So creative deal making became important. And one of the things that I believed very strongly from the start was making sure that they shared in Republix stock, so that they wouldn't just be acquired, but they would be part of the larger vision. And that was something that we just kept on pursuing.
Can you just talk about, for people, a little bit about the structure of the deal itself? And you don't need to go into specifics. I'm sure all of them are a little bit different, but as far as cash, equity, stock, how was it structured when you brought a company in to the Republix platform?
So it evolved over time, but like the typical structure is some cash up front, some sort of delayed consideration, either in the form of an earnout or a promissory note, and rollover equity into Republic stock. So just immediate gratification for them, for the seller, long-term gratification tied to performance, and then a second bite at the apple based on the overall vision and what they were joining.
Yeah, and then in most cases, I think the founders stayed on. They didn't just go back and retire on a beach, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so they're on board. And then how did you capitalize it? Did it change over time, like early? And I think you had said there was 9 companies that were acquired under the kind of that Republix umbrella.
So the first couple were really done in a super creative way because we had no money. So, it was a combination of, lines of credit and primarily that. And then on a go forward, it was commercial debt. So using the big banks to go ahead and fund the cash portion of the deals. And then in 2021, then we did a large corporate deal with the Bank of Montreal, where then they gave us they kind of refinanced all the debt and provided us with an acquisition facility. So that's kind of been the evolution.
What made you decide to like at this point in time, you're not actively looking for acquisitions?
Correct.
At what point did you decide, okay, we're good for now until later?
Well, it's more, there's acquisition and then there's integration. And when it comes to like a standard private equity model, which we're not, it's acquire a bunch of stuff based on your size, you're worth more, and then you go ahead and sell that or take it public, right? But for us, in terms of having an integrated model where all of these services are available on one centralized platform to be able to deliver seamlessly to people, it's not a normal roll-up. It's not. It's just we found the most effective way to get those services is through acquisition, because building and partnering for it didn't work, right? So it's more acquisitions was a tool to build the vision instead of the business model itself. And then what we were realizing was, what I realized was that I really needed to go ahead and dive into those respective operations, do the hard work of creating offers for the market that were performance-based or value-driven, that took the best pieces of each of these different agencies and packaged them in a way that was meaningful for the customer, right? And so that takes time. And for example, like one of our companies, we acquired them for like $1.5 million. They were doing $1.5 million worth of revenue, and very specialized in the dental space. And just by reframing that offer and going out to market with very scalable lead generation, sales conversion processes, and delivery processes, I would expect that particular offer to do anywhere between $7 to $10 million worth of revenue next year. So if you think about that, like there's such latent power within each one of these businesses that we've acquired that one, we know how to do acquisitions clearly. You know, we did 10 in 2 years. That's ruthless. Okay, we know how to do that. The second portion is unlock the value that has been acquired, right? Because that ultimately is what de-risked the transaction and also the whole acquisition thesis. Like, why did you buy this thing? Right? Now, we had some failures, no doubt. We also had some big wins, right? And so this is an example of like how best to go ahead and look at different companies and being like, okay, do you have a very strong vertical expertise? And that goes kind of into acquisition criteria, even though we're not looking right now, we will be in the future, but it's like very strong vertical expertise. You know how to deliver predictable results in terms of revenue, sales for that particular vertical. Like you have a way of doing that and it works repeatedly, right? And then at the same time, like you ideally have some salespeople that have been able to convert that aren't the founder, right? That's also very, very important. And usually $1 million in EBITDA, right? Because when you're at $1 million in EBITDA, you have some degree of systems, right? So when we look at that situation, then we could take a company like that and probably 5 to 10x it within a 1 to 2 year period. And that is a great acquisition thesis.
I'd love for you to expand a little bit on that, the acquisition criteria. If there's anything else that you typically look for, you mentioned the vertical expertise, predictability of results for the clients, salespeople, or just, you know, a good team in place. 1 million in EBITDA, which, you know, you said relates to systems, or any other criteria that you were looking for.
Like ideally, they have a management team that is not the founder, that is operating the business, because that means there's been a proper knowledge transfer from the founder that got procedurized, and that somebody who's not them can do that work. And especially in this sort of a business, like it's all around the process that you have around the management and the delivery of your services, right? So that's also a plus.
I know we learn from our failures sometimes more than our successes. So I love to talk about what were some of the learnings from the failures. But it's interesting, you know, Thomas, I wasn't expecting to go on this call to say you were not acquiring companies anymore. Because if you look at it, you've done, in a couple of years, you've grown over $30 million, right? Let's say from my research is over $10 million in EBITDA. When you would acquire a company, I'm curious about the valuation piece, but like if you acquire a company 1 to 2 times, when they come into you, they're immediately, without doing anything, worth a larger multiple than what you bought them for, right? So I'm like, why is he stopping acquisitions? But maybe it's a debt thing. I don't know.
So there's also the challenges from a debt market standpoint. There's no doubt, right? In terms of interest rates rising and otherwise. The other aspect is that like our industry as a whole has been in recession for 5 quarters. So there's contraction of revenue, there's pressure at the level of marketing budgets, Some of our subsegments, especially in the direct-to-consumer market, they're not hitting their numbers, and therefore they're entering restructuring phases and otherwise. So just from a macro environment standpoint, it's just like we have to go ahead and see how can we maximize what we have, right? Because then adding more things just increases the complexity of what needs to be solved. So I often, like, it's tattooed on my back, a difficulty is nothing more than an opportunity. So as these difficulties came in, we said, what are the fundamental things that we need to go ahead and focus further on? Customer retention, the onboarding experience, the customer experience, going to the market value-based instead of commoditized. Because like we were on an up market, it's very, very easy to sell when everything's going great. But when things are choppy and the environment is tough, if you're still selling and converting at a high rate, then you know you have a strong value-based offer, because people are willing to part with their money based on the value that you're delivering. So it really forced us to shift our offers much closer to the vision of Republix, of this hassle-free and predictable revenue one-stop shop. And we said, okay, well, let's do the hard work. And once that hard work is complete, then when we acquire, then we're going to be extremely successful. Because you're right, let's say we buy them 3-4 times, and then you're worth 10 times. Let's just say automatically you've 2.5x your equity value or your enterprise value, right? Because they're still dead. But if now we said, well, it's not only that, but now we can actually 10x what that EBITDA was. Now you've created 1.25 orders of magnitude return. That is insane, right? 25 times return on that initial thing. And when your cash outlay is zero, that's beyond an undetermined return. So it's more, we figured out the front, great, we're good at that. Let's figure out the back. And funny enough, by having that shift in perspective, it actually changed our acquisition criteria. Because if we look at the previous model, and because it's very easy, as human beings, we like to take the easy route. It's funny that the easy route is do 10 acquisitions in 2 years. But the easy route is like, oh, let's just do this thing and look great. We generated another $20 million worth of equity value. Let's do it again and again and again. The lens there is financial. If we take the lens of the customer at the center and saying, how do we make that customer win? And the goal then is market penetration and market share and share of wallet, which only comes if you're delivering value to the market. If not, they won't expand. The customer won't expand with you. Then suddenly the acquisition criteria it's actually not about the financial aspect. It's how good is that market? How productized are you? How scalable is that solution? How predictable is that revenue? I mean, the results for the customer, the revenue for the customer. Okay, great, let's scale that. Because what happens there, like that example, like $1.5 million company doing $400,000 in EBITDA, going to, let's say, $7 million worth of revenue at like $3 million in EBITDA, that return of, let's say, 10, 12x is far greater than the 2.5 times arbitrage that we had from going from just the multiple arbitrage. Not only that, but we still get the multiple arbitrage on that extra $2.5 million of EBITDA we generated. So it's a triple bite at the apple, but you got to know what you're doing. And for that, it requires like the proper systems, the right kind of team, the right integration process, and knowing how to unlock that value. So that shifted our focus. The other thing is we don't need you to be 2 million in EBITDA. Technically, we could buy a break-even business that knows how to generate great revenues for their client. We pay nothing for it, zero risk, and then scale it to 3 million in EBITDA. Okay, well, that's even less risky than anything else. So just some interesting thoughts that have come from that shift in perspective by saying, we're not going to do this thing we're amazing at anymore. We're going to focus on this thing that we're terrible at. It wasn't terrible. We just from cross sells with what I was calling terrible was 20% of our revenues last year. But we could just be so much better if we really got diligent on that, because then there's nothing stopping us from doing an acquisition a week. So sometimes we got to take a step back to build the infrastructure to be able to sprint forward, right? And a bunch of people would say, you were sprinting at 10 acquisitions in 2 years. I say, no, Apple does one a week. So we got a long ways to go, but you need to be able to digest that and unlock the value, right? And unlocking the value comes by unlocking more value for more customers of that thing you're acquiring.
Talk about the evolution of the agency valuations a little bit. I also want to point out what you said. I did an interview with Sujan Patel, who started Mailshake. I don't know. I think when we talked, they have like 70,000 customers, but he was doing acquisitions and he was talking about this. The integration's tough, and they gave at least 6 months per acquisition for integration alone, and it was not easy. So you guys are on hyperspeed there. But talk about valuation, because you're talking to a founder, right? It's their baby. There's an emotion piece. You're looking at just, here's the criteria, here's the financials. But when you're talking to a founder, it's a little bit different conversation. Sometimes they have, you'll tell me, inflated view of how much their company's worth, potentially.
Correct.
I don't know if you found that. How did those conversations go? And it's kind of a valuation piece. What have you seen with the evolution of the valuation and that conversation with founders?
So it starts by being really clear where you have to say no. So our underwriting model is very clear. We know where the valuation needs to be in order for them to get their money, right? We also have the benefit of having an acquisition facility with BMO when we decide to go ahead and start acquiring again. So there's also the money's there. So number one is like understanding what is your model, because you can't lose. Acquisitions are risky. Okay, so that's number one. So if I'm very, very clear in terms of what we could pay, you can choose to say yes or no. And if you say no, and if it's close, we can have a conversation. If it's like, I need 8x and you're doing 400,000 EBITDA, next. There's 14,000 agencies. 95% of businesses don't sell. And so it's also an internal recognition that in that conversation, I am the valuable one. Now, I don't say that out of pride. It's from a negotiating standpoint. It's like, you will not find somebody else that can action on this deal and actually get the deal done. Right? So on like 13 LOIs, we closed 10 deals. That's a really, really high hit rate. So it's like, do you choose the hit rate and the money is there and this is how it's going to work? And by the way, this is how you get a second bite at the apple. If that works for you, great. And if it doesn't, next, because there's another one of you, right? So that's what I learned. I was emotionally attached to a few, and I was like, no. And that's where, having proper mentorship at those levels, I think, is important.
We'll talk about mentorship in a second, but back to the failures piece. What did you learn from some of the failures that you brought in to the acquisitions going forward?
So, and they don't just tie to acquisitions. Like there were many, many things that I would do differently now, but I'm grateful for what happened, because it built me to who I am today. From an acquisition standpoint, really making sure that the revenue is recurring and that the contracts are strong. We got our asses kicked on a couple because of that. The other aspect,
Like there wasn't recurring revenue there. They had a good.
but it wasn't. We didn't dig deep enough, right? The other one is when the founder or the founders are responsible for sales and have a lack of process with regards to managing their companies. Well, that bit us a couple times too, right? So those are some of the learnings there. But I think the biggest learning is at the level of governance. Like we set a board up right off the bat, and it's important that that board be aligned with your values and what it is that you're looking to create. That running a business is really hard. And so having supportive people that are honest, that will tell you the bad news, that provide the critical feedback, but do it in a kind way is important, right? And that I think is probably the most important because the board represents the shareholders. And it's important that if you're the founder of that company and you're the majority shareholder, that you control that board. And I didn't. And so that became very problematic and ended up forcing a shift in strategy at a time that it was the wrong move, right? It was the wrong move because nobody knows the business more than the CEO. Nobody has more information about the business, is more in tune with what needs to be done. And ultimately, and this is something that I learned from our current chairman and mentor, Yuri Levine, who, he was the co-founder and CEO of Waze, the traffic navigation app.
Yeah, I think they sold for over $1 billion to Google.
Yeah, like 1.1 billion. And then he did it again with Move It, and they sold to Intel for $1 billion. Like he's just a unicorn minter, right? And at the end of the day, it's just really, really important to have the right people surrounding you from a mentorship standpoint, and just really really supporting you, because the CEO's job is the hardest job. It just is, right? There's so many variables, there's incomplete information, and you need to make decisive decisions on a very consistent basis because it's life or death for the company, right? So
talk about some of the mentors and a lesson or advice I gave you, and maybe we could work in reverse order. Because when I go back to the Thomas, the one-man army Thomas, I'm sure there were different mentors, either actual personal mentors or distant mentors than there are now. But let's go reverse. Like now, some of your board members, some of the advice they gave you. Start with Yuri.
Man, Yuri's just incredible.
How did you get in touch with Yuri in the first place?
I met him at an investor roundtable with YPO, which is a global organization I'm part of, Young Presidents Organization, one of the best things I've ever done. And he was presenting, and I was just asking him a bunch of questions about business, and otherwise we just ended up having a great conversation. And I was like, hey, we should do something. He's like, if I can add value, I'd love to be a part of it. And he's just been incredible. So the lessons from Yuri, there's just so many, like one of them is put the customer and their problem at the center of your universe. So that's been life-changing for me. The other thing, more from a CEO standpoint, is that how to go ahead and deliver like tough news and feedback in a way that is constructive. He just does such a great job at that, and just seeing him operate is incredible. He also forces me to celebrate our wins. Like, hey, take a moment. That's awesome. Like you're not taking enough time on that, and bring that to your team. right? So yeah, Yuri's really been at the level of like leadership and also like a holistic way of looking at the business in a very pragmatic way to drive results. Prior to that, another life-changing mentor was Dan Pena. And I think the biggest, there's a few different lessons there, but one of them is that concept of next that I brought up earlier. He was the one that taught me that. He also taught me everything I know about M&A. So that was very, very helpful. And at the same time, to be harder. But there's a distinction between being hard. You can be hard and demanding of people and kind, and being hard and demanding and an asshole. Right? There's a distinction, and you'll see a lot of leaders out there, they're trying to wrestle with this situation, right? But being hard and demanding of my people, because I was leaning on being too nice and wanting to be liked. That's one of the things, like, as a CEO, it's not about being liked, it's about doing the right thing and holding your people to a high standard. And I choose to do that through building them up, coaching, giving them proper feedback on it, holding them to account. And ultimately, you know, if they don't perform, then it's the conversation that needs to be had. And then my job is to have the best team on the bench at any given time. But doing that with kindness, I think, really matters. And prior to that, another critical mentor for me was Offer Breyer. He's an Israeli. He was a top transformational consultant for Breyer Group, Disney, Nike, whatever, and he never went to school. Then he revolutionized the education system in the Czech Republic, was brought into Singapore's education system to go ahead and work on that. He worked on Elon Musk's school. So he's a teacher at heart. Jazz pianist, martial artist, like just an incredible human being that dove really, really deep at the level of how learning occurs and how to transfer knowledge from one individual to another and how to go ahead and bring maximal effectiveness and efficiency in a human being. So he became a mentor. I met him through an event. Everybody was clamoring around. And then we went out for dinner in Chicago, funny enough. And he's like, I'll work with you. And then what I did with all of my mentors is I was always the best student. Right? I was Dan's best student. I'm Yuri's best student. I'm, Offer's best student, because a mentor loves a great student. Right? Maybe I'm not the best on some of these, but they're just like, man, this guy's just doing everything I tell him fast. And they love that. And so the mentor then gives so much more. Like I wasn't paying Offer. He was getting paid $1,000 an hour. I paid him nothing. And he loved speaking with me, still does. So, so the thing that he showed me is that all technology is a methodology. And the key at the level of delivering results is a predictable process. So, and that was transformative in terms of the thesis of Republix, right? Which is turning a service into a repeatable methodology, which can now be tech enabled for massive scale, and how to produce that result in the end. So I would say those have been like the most critical mentors from a business standpoint. And on a spiritual side, I had a guru, and who initiated me in Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, taught me meditation, breathing exercises, concentration, like really, really working on my spiritual self at a whole other level that was extremely scientific, and that who I am impacts everything I do. So for me, tapping into this source is a critical area of my inspiration, strength, and everything that I do. So Guruji was instrumental in transforming helping me with a predictable methodology to transform my being. So yeah, those are just a few, but man, I've had
Talk
a lot.
about Jason Swank for a second, his role and influence.
So Jason Swank's fucking awesome. Because funny enough, it was his agency Blueprint that helped eRational procedurize a lot of its operations to scale to the next level. So that's how I got introduced to Jason. And when I created Republix with my co-founder Nico, I reached out to him like, hey, Jason, we're about to do this thing. It's crazy. This is what we're going to do. We have nothing right now. I'd love for you to be on my board. And so we had an advisory board then, and he's still active now. And he's like, yeah, well, I'll come in on this. Let's do it. And and Jason's just a very kind and practical person, and he's extremely efficient. What he does with an hour and how he goes ahead and compartmentalizes his priorities in his life, I highly respect. You know, he's a great marketer. He's a great business leader. He knows how to create product. But also he's just like a really great and kind sounding board, always there to support.
You know, we have a few more minutes. I can go on for hours with this, Thomas, based, there's a lot to unpack here, but I do want to highlight a little bit more about what you do as a company. And I don't know if we should talk about the IT services one, the R&D tax one. Which one would be better to talk through and what you did?
Gotcha. So, I mean, so in terms of like examples of work that we've done and the type of results, yeah, like for example, there's an IT services company, selling to the mid-market, helped them generate over 3 million in sales in a 6-month period. There's an R&D tax credit professional services company that was coming into Canada at that time. So they had no presence here. So we took them $0 to $5 million in pipeline in 6 months. And then they ended up closing a few $1 million worth of business out of that.
Talk about the IT services for a second. What were some of the levers you had to pull to go from 0 to 3 million?
So the tactics that were used within our ecosystem, email, LinkedIn, video, targeted calling, an event-based methodology to go ahead and bring those individuals in one centralized event, and automation, marketing automation. So that was that one. So you see, it's these combinations of these different, what we call SKUs, kind of like inventory SKUs that were pulled together to deliver a result.
Love it. Thomas, last question. And before I ask it, I just want to point people to check out more, learn more, Republix.com. That's REPUBLIX.com. Are there any other places online we should point people towards to check to learn more?
That's a great place to start. It's funny, our website is always the lagging indicator of what we're doing. So that's reflective of who we were maybe 2 years ago. But as you know, as we're looking at these things, I would say come on my LinkedIn, connect with me, and then from that standpoint, more than happy to have a conversation. There's also, different interviews and otherwise that I've done here over the last little bit, that go into our methodology and otherwise. But yeah.
Last question, Thomas, is just you're obviously a voracious learner, soaking up from mentors, books. I'm just curious, some of your favorite resources and books. It could be leadership, business. What are some of your favorites?
One of my favorite books is The One Thing by Gary Keller. He founded Keller Williams, and he goes into a methodology to prioritize your life and how best to go ahead and focus for uncommon results. That book's been a game changer for me. I recommend it all the time. Another one is actually Alex Hormozi, and he came out with a book called $100 Million Offers, and he just did such a great job on that, how to create a brain dead offer that people would feel stupid saying no to. And it's just very rare to find people who are speaking from experience and not just peddling their wares, and the only thing they know how to make money on is selling you how to do something that they've only done it by selling it to you, right? That's not a thing. That's just like charlatan stuff, right? But the people that are practically in the trenches, getting the work done, producing the results, always testing, evolving, I really respect those folks. So that's been a really great book. A Winner's Dream by Bill McDermott, CEO of ServiceNow, was the CEO of SAP, and just a tremendous book of like a very strong leader that who leads with decisiveness, takes no nonsense, and is just kind. He's just a good man, and really respect him and love his story. It's a great story. Oh, last one, Phil Knight, Shoe Dog. Such a great book.
I feel like that's I call that a kind of entrepreneurial therapy in a sense. Yeah.
It's amazing because he's so candid and vulnerable as he's going through his story, and it's fascinating. So yeah, those are just a few off the top of my head.
Thomas, I want to be the first one to thank you. Everyone check out Republix.com to learn more. Thomas, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Thanks for having me here.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like $100 grand.